you to this session. It's all about leadership and strategy of EdTech across schools and maths. My name is Giles Hill. You'll see my details there. You're very welcome to contact me after the session today if you wish. And we are very pleased to be part of the EdTech Demonstrator Programme, which continues into its second year now. And actually it's being revised and regrouped. Some of the icons and names down the bottom there are now not going to be involved in it. There's a different delivery partner. And so, as you would have seen in my email to you earlier, I may well be, there we go. I may well be requesting you fill in a very quick form for me so that we can register your attendance on this session with this EdTech Demonstrator Programme. So basically, we are receiving some funding in order to put on webinars and training throughout this year, all the way up to Easter 2022. And you are very, very welcome to engage with us in whichever way you want, whether that's just a quick ear onto a webinar or whether you want some one-to-one bespoke training and support for your school and staff. That is all a possibility. Okay, so do be in touch. We do have materials up on the web at the moment. There's some links there to get you through to that stuff. Lots of the content has been relevant to the remote learning phase that lots of schools have been in, and everyone here in England and in the UK is all fingers crossed that we can maintain some normality as we go back and schools are back to some form of normality, albeit with the restrictions that we're still currently under. And so we're currently again redesigning, revising our web content to make it more relevant to where schools are now. And just coming to that, you know, the EdTech Demonstrator Programme and us, we're really pivoting to the question of, well, schools have now got lots and lots of new devices, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But we need to answer the question of, well, what are you going to do with them? And for us as people specialising in primary school, we really think that the best place for those devices is to have them well deployed within the school environment. And I'll come to this later, but we absolutely suggest that Key Stage 2 is the zone where you're going to get the most benefit from those devices. I myself, when I was in school yesterday teaching, you know, in the school in which I teach a day a week, they've got 2 sets of class devices. And actually looking at what's there, it's probably the provision has never been better. But does that mean that the devices are out every day being used? Does that mean that teachers are necessarily tapping into the potential of those devices that are there? I would say not 100%, and it's going to be the same for schools up and down the country that have been not inundated with devices, but lots of them have got new sets. It's really interesting to think of the contrast with secondary schools. I was talking to a secondary school head the other day, and he was saying, well, from our point of view, we want those devices in the hands of the students and them using them well for their studies out in the community. I would say that for primaries, it's very much about making best use of them within the school environment, and we're going to talk heavily about that. So here's a slide that just shows that we've got lots and lots of further webinars coming up. And again, you're very welcome to be in touch with us directly. So what I'm going to talk about does relate more to primary education. But having said that, our, you know, as an organisation of 28 schools, we have a very experienced IT head who covers all of our Microsoft-based infrastructure and makes some very, very key and pertinent decisions in terms of the hardware that's out there, the networking approach, how that works for staff, how that works for children, the Wi-Fi units used, the you know, the use of cloud services, all that type of stuff is also very relevant to secondary education. And so, you know, if you're coming from that point of view, we do have a lot to offer you in terms of the infrastructure that your school is using. When it comes to classroom basis, when it comes to pedagogy, we're firmly in the primary zone, and we believe it's a very, very specific zone that differs quite immensely from where schools are at secondary. We will cover that in just a moment. So let's bring that up further in the Q&A and discussion later, if you wish. My colleague I just mentioned, Peter Bradburn, so he is running 2 further sessions next week. One is on infrastructure choices and another one is on cybersecurity. So if that side of things is something that you are particularly interested in, then do sign up for those 2 events. I can signpost you to the place to sign up later. You probably found it already on our Eventbrite page. So he's got a lot of specific tech knowledge to offer you in that respect. So moving on. Here are some points about what we're trying to achieve for schools. And in that you can also see what we're not trying to achieve. We don't want to rip everything up. As it says at the top there, we're looking at an evolution of teaching, not chucking everything away and inevitably chucking the baby out with the bathwater. So I am much more in favour of schools taking small, albeit fairly bold, steps with technology. You know, if schools have got lots of devices, your school may have lots of devices now from recent times. Great. Let's make sure that they're working well. Let's make sure that they're provisioned well. And let's make sure that teachers are actually able to integrate them into their day-to-day life and feel that there is a benefit to them. The big 30 number over there is just to flag up the fact that, you know, in most state schools, you're working with classes that may be up to 30, may even be up to, you know, 36, 37, even higher numbers. That is a very demanding environment. Anyone who thinks that being in a classroom with that number of children in a day isn't a tough place to be hasn't been doing it recently. You know, and there's a lot of variety within schools, within and across schools as well. The technology needs to support that situation. We can't be fighting the technology while we also do this incredibly tough job with so many children. Okay, the technology's got to complement that situation. It's got to free up time and space for teachers. It's got to help with the learning, not hinder it. And if we look back at many of the attempts at implementing technology in classrooms over, you know, last 30 years, I think lots of us can reflect on it and say, do you know what, the technology wasn't quite ready to work with those children. I believe now that we're at a point where we can spend moderate amounts of money, and as long as we make the right strategic choices, we can actually hugely complement what goes on in a classroom. It's not going to be necessarily about spending huge amounts of money at all, which is brilliant news, because, you know, budgets are not exactly flowing with cash. But it is about making some really key choices, and it is about honing your use of technology and making it work really well, not just have, you know, the potential to work well. And so, you know, part of our drive in our program as Digital Learning Cornwall, and part of the EdTech Demonstrator program is to really empower the schools and their staff and to sort of cut through the hype, cut through the jargon, be really insistent that there's loads and loads of products out there, loads of people who will try and sell products, but most of them aren't for you, right? Most of them, they might have potential to be brilliant one day, but perhaps they're not going to work right now. And you know, you have to be really quite cutthroat in terms of choosing what you think is going to complement your teachers and your situation, and build that opinion. We've got the Sustain, Explore, Prepare, Deliver, you know, circle over there from the EEF. You know, that's always going to be a relevant way of working when you're implementing new things. I would say that if you're, it's probably more relevant to large secondaries where you can put something in motion, and if it really isn't going to work, you could create a bit of a disaster for a lot of people. In small primaries like we have access to, you are in the situation where you're able to experiment that little bit more without causing huge upset to loads and loads of staff. So for us as a group of 28 primaries, we may well implement something within 1 or 2 primary schools, try something out, move forward with a product, trial it, thrash it out, see what's good, see what's bad, and then if a product is genuinely going to enhance what people are doing, well then let's promote it and push it out to the other schools. But again, I was talking about this just the other day, we try not to be too dictatorial in saying you must use this product or this approach, because there is strength in the diversity of approaches out there, and teachers will always want to do things in slightly different ways. A nod towards infrastructure and the where we want to be, and there's some points here if you scan down through them. I hope that this will ring true with what exactly we're trying to achieve. Basically, no one's got time to be messing around with technology, have they? When we pick up mobile phones these days, we turn them on and we tap buttons, and the things are working for us. And if they weren't working that reliably, then no one would be carrying them around in their pockets. They would have just given up on them. And so we have to create that sort of environment within schools where technology is seamless, where a device hooks up to the network, hooks into systems, and it just works. And you can't underestimate the worth of that, but you probably can't underestimate the tweaks and the make sure this box is ticked and think about how this bit works to actually get it to go and get it to work there. So some other points here about what you need. There's a point there about fast internet. I know that there are lots and lots of schools across the country and their internet connection is lacking and not fast enough, perhaps not reliable enough, those internet connections where it drops off every so often, or whatever it might be. Really, those things are kind of brick walls and no-goes, aren't they, for actually getting people to use this stuff. So I would implore you to dig out those problems and solve them as quickly as possible. And I'm acutely aware that perhaps sometimes that can't be done at speed. If you need to get your road dug up to get that fast internet connection put in, then unfortunately you can certainly be up against a time scale on that. But unless that speedy internet connection is in there in your school, don't then go getting loads and loads of other equipment. Unfortunately, some schools are going to have to play a bit of a waiting game in terms of things working and things not. There is the Rural Gigabit Connectivity Programme out there, which strangely some schools don't know about. If you're, I was hearing about certain parts of Devon where there are schools very, actually quite remote relatively, and connections are not great. Look up that program, see if it can do something for you, but otherwise do whatever you can to knock on doors and say we need this connection sorted out. Filtering is another aspect of this puzzle as well. You'll see down the bottom there I talked about filtering experience where you've got more control. In our group we moved from using those internet service providers that are billed as being for schools, the ones that include filtering in their package, and have moved to a situation where we use standard commercial internet service providers, which are often a lot cheaper. and we've implemented our own filtering system across those 28 schools. Now, I can tell you that that is one of the most fantastic decisions that this trust has made, for the simple fact that the control is all in our hands and in our IT staff's hands, to change things within seconds rather than have to ask somebody else to do it. And also financially, it leads to huge gains over the long term. There may be a little bit to pay at the beginning, I believe, but over the longer term, it's a much more financially worthwhile way to proceed. You might not be in a position where you can do that, but it is worth talking to your IT support about that approach, because I know that IT support for schools in various capacities are aware of that approach, and they may well be able to implement something for you. Now, staff feedback. I've talked a little bit about trials, trialing software, trying things out, and being, cautious, necessarily cautious. You may think that product is an absolute answer to your dreams, but actually it's only when you implement the thing that you really know that it's going to work for you. So if you can build any networks of feedback from staff who've had great experiences with a product and an approach, that is really invaluable. But as is, staff who've had a really bad experience with a product, you need to get in there and try and work out why. Is it something that can be solved? Or is it, unfortunately, something that the developers of the product are going to have to solve themselves? Don't tie yourselves to a system for a number of years unless you're truly convinced that it's something that's going to help you. And I said down the bottom here, last point here, we're not trying to put systems in here that are just for tech savvy teachers. I know that there are teachers out there with a lot more technical knowledge and understanding than other teachers. I'd put myself in that bracket. I'm interested in technology. I can talk about the new products and the new systems and be a lot more interested probably than most teachers. But most teachers aren't like that, and so this isn't about changing those teachers into tech-loving people. It's about having solutions that are going to work for everyone. So the feedback that you get actually from the non-tech savvy teachers, I have found to be actually some of the most valuable, if not more valuable, than the feedback you get from a teacher who understands technology well. If you've got a teacher whose specialism is somewhere totally different, that they use computers a bit, but they may be a bit, skeptical, a bit scared, and then you get them, raving about a product, then you know that you have hit something golden, and you know that that's something that will scale up well, potentially, across your group. If it's just a few teachers using it, well, that maybe there's some worth in it, in that product or approach, but it's not something that's going to hit the big time and really, really embed itself with staff. So think in those terms. It's taken me a while, I guess, to really, firmly believe that. But I don't think teachers are about to necessarily become lovers of technology, even if in the last year or so they've had to grasp it and they've had to take the bull by the horns and get on with it, and that's been a good experience for teachers, I'm sure, in upskilling them. But yeah, again, it's about getting things done, not being in love with technology. This point is about really about efficiency and getting the benefits of technology, and it's really a pointer towards a lot of EdTech companies as well. I really think that they don't quite get how wonderful it is when teachers have full control over what's going on with their software and with their devices. I mean, we're skirting around at the minute because we really would love to find a way to teachers have further control over the Chromebooks that they have in their classes. We'd love for there to be a button that we can click and that disables all of the devices, and then another button you can click, and then they all pop back on again. And we don't have that solution currently, despite being firm believers that Chromebooks are really a great device for schools to have in them for various reasons. You'll see at the top right there, I flagged up Apple Classroom. Now that's a lovely bit of software that Apple have produced. I can talk forever about the missed opportunities of Apple and how iPads are a nightmare to manage for schools, and how really in most situations I wouldn't suggest. For most schools, I think the Chromebook is the winner in terms of a majority device. And I talk to you as someone with an Apple phone in my pocket, and I'm speaking to you through a MacBook here. But Apple Classroom with iPads remains a free bit of software that lets you, let's say you've got a box of 8 iPads in the school. You can have one of them that you tap some buttons on, and it will lock all of the iPads to one app, and you can press a button and they will be silent as well. And so children coming in the morning, you might want them to use that app, might be maths intervention, for example. Tap, 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 done, they're locked, and the children come in and use them. And it's that level of speed and simplicity that we're after. The example over there, which says challenges and competitions, well, that's some of the systems within SumDog, again, another maths bit of software. And again, it teaches really to really take them to a level that we want them to be at. We need teachers logging in, using the analytics from these different systems, setting competitions, challenges, etc., whatever it's called. You are directing children to areas of a subject you want them to be in, or you're choosing the times tables that they're going to practice that week, or whatever it might be. Those systems can be really powerful. The one down the bottom there is from Spelling Shed, which has been a great success for us, actually, and for a number of schools. And in there, it now has a system. It's a little bit fiddly to set up, but it means you can assign your whole year's worth of spelling in one go. And so I did that for our school in September. And then the spellings are assigned for the year. And when the children log in, they get access to that week's spellings. And of course, the teachers need to be ready to say, all right, I'm going to set up every, spellings for the majority of her class. But it's that level of time saving that can be wonderful. I mean, if you think about the situation with spelling in primary schools, there's an awful lot of photocopying sheets, handing them out to children, working in that way, and it becomes a sort of endless chore in a way. Not that the task hasn't got its benefits, but you can see sometimes technology can slot in there, solve something, and it's lovely when you just got it solved for a year like that. You've got the system set up, and then you're immediately, week by week, your teachers are benefiting. A little note here about specifically primary schools. And I was thinking about, I talk about this a lot, the way that primary school children, much as with anything else, they are learning how to use systems and tools. And I find it a little bit distressing when people sort of go into a year one classroom and they say, right, I'm going to teach you how to use Word today, and I'm going to show you the toolbar in something like Word or Google Docs or whatever it might be. And the truth is that it's not really that appropriate for children of that age. You need to be choosing tools that will work again seamlessly and allow children to have a certain level of independence over what they're looking at. That does mean that you have to limit what they can do in some ways. You can't just, if we take the bike example, if I took a group of 20 children out onto a playground who are 4 years old, and I gave them all a balance bike, we'd probably have, and make sure they put their helmets on, they'd probably have a great time, and there would be that level of independence built into the equipment they're using, because they can sit on the thing and they can ride it around, and that's okay. If I gave them all a full-size adult's motorbike, we'd have a total disaster, wouldn't we? But if I even gave them, if I gave them a bike that was of their size, with no stabilizers on it, and some gears, which is overly complicating it for them, then it'd also be a disaster. So the technology that children use has to suit where they are at the time. And actually, I would say we need to bring in technology when it's appropriate for those children. I would say in reception and year one, I don't really think they're necessarily at a point where lots of time using devices is going to be especially important. I think some of the touchscreen, the iPad stuff can have its place in there. Sticking Chromebooks in front of year ones is not necessarily going to get you results, but you shouldn't really care either, because down at reception, nursery, year one, we're dealing with lots of children who are bombarded with technology at home, and lots of nonsense and rubbish, frankly, as well. And so having an environment that's a bit of a sanctuary away from technology there is good. I mean, lots of the computing curriculum can be done without screen-based learning. Children on feet, thinking about directions, thinking about turning left, turning right. All of that stuff in some ways is better done without a screen. It's at key stage 2, maybe kind of halfway through year 2, where children start to be able to have the necessary sort of independence and dexterity to be able to use a device like a Chromebook and get something worthwhile out of it. There's no point using it with them if you can't look back on it and say that was a really worthwhile experience. And I think in the past, if technology lessons or going into a room with computers takes ages and ages and ages of time in a school day, well, then it's failed, hasn't it? It's failed in terms of its use of time. If we can get to a situation where children can pick up a device, log in, and things happen seamlessly, then we're in a different place, I think. And so it says at the top there, never underestimate simplicity within the EdTech process. I mean, we can reflect on that as adults. We all sort of strive for simplicity and crave some simplicity in the systems that we use. We just want them to work. You'll see on the right hand side there, example of system that we have where children open a Chromebook and they either use a QR code badge, which people are far more familiar with now with all of the COVID QR codes and everything. So they scan their way in like that, or they use an emoji, which they are unquestionably excited about having their own 6-digit PIN emoji sequence that they can remember. We tend to use those with the older children because they will remember them. And so, but the point about this is, once the children have logged in, you get a dashboard of services, and all of the passwords tend to then get synced up in the background. So you're really getting away from the situation where children have to, either remember lots of passwords or they've got lots of passwords stuck on a book and they type them out or what have you. We know that those are barriers to children having simple access, and every time I go into the classroom and use these devices with children, I can pretty much say, log in, go to this service, and they know to go in and click. And that's working with year 3, year 4 children. I think I worked with about 60 children yesterday from one class and then another with computers. There was one child who had forgotten her emoji, and that was after the Easter holidays. It slipped out of her thinking slightly, but I got it up on the computer and she looked and remembered it, and away you go. So once you overcome those hurdles, things really start to open up. And again, what does it look like in a classroom? Well, I often use the example of VR headsets or 3D printers or any other piece of technology that schools are attracted to. But for us in the primary zone, these are things that you could buy. You might use them a couple of times, but I would hazard that for the most part, as things stand at the moment, they wouldn't get lots and lots of use. And so that's not acceptable for us. If we've got devices that children can seamlessly get out, whether that's a trolley that's wheeled into a classroom and then they take a device and log in, we've created something far more usable on a day-by-day basis. And I put a photo in there of a child working alongside a book. The integration or the the not mirroring, but the projects that work alongside written work, whether that's children then editing and improving a piece of writing on a screen, or maybe they're using resources from a screen and they're writing in a book, those are often activities that feel really, really beneficial for the progress that the children are making through their school life. Remember, for us, we've still got SATs, which are for the most part written tests, and so we have to bear that in mind. It's not about chucking away handwriting, but I would say there is a conversation that needs to be had, and a debate about where's the importance in skills these days. Where does typing come into a child's development? And I would say if a child goes to a secondary school and they haven't experienced a QWERTY keyboard and being able to edit text on screen, then they are probably at significant disadvantage to a child who has. And I would also say we shouldn't leave that skill to the home. It should be something that is introduced in primary schools, and I don't think many people would disagree with that. It's how much how much typing should children do, and I'm not the person to say there should be loads and loads and loads of it, but I am the person to say, it should be that certain pieces of work get produced on screen. It probably should be these days that pieces of work are published online, because it's absolutely within your grasp to do that by using these devices. And I could talk more about more specific products and workflows if you like. I produced this infographic recently, which is sort of a way to move away from the obsession with learning platforms that has been there, and I know that that's been a necessary obsession because of remote learning, and I also know that for secondary schools it's a huge part of how they work. For primaries, it's part of the puzzle. It's something we want children to be introduced to. It's something we want them to have some experience of, but it in no way is it the end game. In no way is it a situation you say, well, everything just goes on a learning platform and you learn on there, because we've got children who can, some children who struggle with reading. I mean, it's children in secondary who struggle with reading, that's another story. But the classroom environment is a great learning platform. Teachers teach children when they're in front of them really, really well. And I think there's I was working with learning platforms about 4 or 5 years ago. I was working with Seesaw, and I looked at Google Classroom then and thought about, where does this fit in best? Well, actually, for us in primary, it fits in best in the homework zone. It fits well in terms of, that homeschool communication, and again, homework and projects done outside of school. It can work really well in there. But sometimes when you're using tools in class, I mean, if I was using learning by questions, which we're trialing from next week, another big push for that, which has certainly got its place in year 5 and 6, if not a bit below. Of using something like Book Creator, which, oh my goodness, that's just the number one tool for me in terms of, a place for children to write, a place for children to combine images and text, and for the workflow to be great as well, then we don't need a learning platform. We don't really need a learning platform to make those systems work. The work goes into them, and that's it. So you know, if you are thinking about primary education, don't go down the route of thinking everything is going to be on a learning platform necessarily, because I think that will turn teachers off in the longer term, and make it feel like it has to be harder than it actually has to be. There's a slide there about Book Creator. I would encourage you to investigate that thoroughly if you're in primary. We've got some events based around that as well coming up. And that last slide again is just a repeat of ways to get in touch with us. So I am at this point going to come back to you guys. Very much appreciate your time listening and looking and thinking hopefully about some of the things I've said. I try not to be quite too controversial, but at the same time, my opinions are formed through my contact in school and my work in school as a teacher over a number of years. I'm very happy to thrash around some of the ideas through Q&A, and again, I certainly don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything, every bit of gold dust in this arena, because there's a lot out there to investigate. So I'm going to click 3 dots there